where we can see what pops into the tractor at the moment. I am in decent shape, but I'm not in great shape. And I'm getting old, so I'm not 50 yet, 45. It's going downhill fast. Like I said in my graduation speech, the meaning of life is youth. And it really is. You know, all the ethicists agree that death is a good thing. The human lifespan shouldn't be extended. It's just perfect. And then you're supposed to die. And what this really means, even though they don't put it that way, is that old age has no value. And when you get past 75 or something, then you're better off dead because it has no value, and we are better off living or better off without you. Which is to say, very bluntly, even if they don't admit it, that old age has no value. In other words, the meaning of life is youth. It really is. This is even what Steve Jobs said in his graduation speech when he said that death is the great change agent and blah blah blah. He got his wish sooner than he liked, but he got that great thing that he was praising, which is another way to put that youth is the meaning of life. So already at his age wasn't much value left. I think he died at 57 or so. Now for me, I can relate more and more when you see how ugly you get when you get old. And already now you notice, because you're no longer attractive to attractive girls. Mostly. Maybe not universally, but that's the first thing that goes as you age. You can retain vitality and health much longer than you can retain attractiveness. And it does not mean anything if old women still like you in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Who cares? That is not the group we're going for. we're going for young women. So when you lose what they consider acceptable, then you are old. That is how men find out that they are old and realize, as I have done, that the meaning of life is youth. Now, I was special because I was into life extension and cryonics from a young age. So I followed the life extension movement since I was about 16. I joined the Cryonet, where all the cool cryonicists hang out, right? Those that actually do cryonics. In time, I realized that it was futile, but I certainly knew all along that the value of youth, even though it wasn't so salient to me as it is now, and so sad, because longevity is largely meaningless without rejuvenation. Because you're gonna end up ugly most of the time. I will be ugly the rest of my life, only uglier and uglier, of course. And when you realize that, I mean, when it hits you personally, as the reality you're living in, then longevity is no longer a great value, and I have no desire to just go for to maximize that number into old age. I would have a great interest in rejuvenation if it were possible, but longevity without rejuvenation is just approaching the legend of Methuselah, and you don't want to be living the legend of Tithonus, meant to say. Tithonus. I don't know what the hell happened to Methuselah. He must have been incredibly ugly too, but not at the level of Tithonus. So, the legend of Tithonus is a poetic way to say also that the meaning of life is youth, and you don't want longevity without youth. Rejuvenation, that is, since we are only getting older. But there is nothing magical about the human lifespan. The ethicists are wrong that there's something morally praiseworthy about that limit, that number of years that you get. That is arbitrary. You know, we could as well have been a mouse and lived for 2 years, and then if they had ethicists, they would say the same about 2 years. Or we could have been like a shark that lives for 300 years, and if they had ethicists, they would put 300 years as the perfect lifespan. It's all arbitrary. And then it can also, in principle, be arbitrarily extended if we had the technological means to do so, which we don't. We just don't, and we don't have a clue. Those who think they have it already are fooling themselves. They are using snake oil. So right now there's this longevity superstar, Brian Johnson. Oh, I made a video about him already, assessing his snake oil as such. No, I don't believe he has found rejuvenation, because nobody has, because we don't know how to do it yet, or never, because I also think industrial civilization is collapsing. It's collapsing before we make great medical advances, before we get regenerative medicine, before we get rejuvenation, before we cure cancer, before we cure dementia. All these things are too hard for the technology that we came up with. shopping at this store. Sean Carroll's Mindscape is what I usually listen to on my way back.
Hello everyone, welcome to Mindscape Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Carroll. Long-time listeners will be aware of my personal point of view on questions of emergence. Very important here. Don't just make things up, they have to serve some purpose. Typically, in a scientific discussion, the purposes are you can make predictions, they have causal relationships to other things in the world. A table is an emergent concept. It's not anywhere in the standard model of particle physics or anything like that. But by saying there's a table here, that conveys a lot of information. I know things like I could put a cup of coffee on it or sit down and read a book in front of it and so on. So when it gets to human level questions like the self, that's something that is a little bit trickier to think about where it is. A more traditional way of thinking about the self would have been that it's very fundamental to what nature is, how the universe works, is that there is an essence of each human being. And maybe it changes with time or it evolves, but it's part of them. And there are plenty of cultures which thinks it survives after you die and so forth. I, of course, do not want to say that. I don't think of the self as fundamental. I think it is very much fundamental. But that's not the end of this discussion. When you say, okay, something is emergent, there's a lot of questions that get raised by that. Out of what does this concept emerge? Why is it useful? What are the boundaries? How can you improve the definition of it or your understanding of it? With the self, that's going to be an especially tricky thing. So we're going to think about that today with Brian Lowery, who's a social psychologist at Stanford University. He's the author of a new book called Selfless, The Social Creation of You. And not to give too much away of it, but his idea, not coming from a physics background, of course, coming from the psychology angle here, is what we think of as the self is not immutable. It is not fundamental. It is not absolutely there in some way that can never be changed, or our concepts of it can never be updated. Not only, he says, is the idea of the self constructed and emergent, but it is really dependent on other human beings. It does harken very much back to our recent discussion with Hugo Mercier, who says that the reason why we invent reasons and giving reasons for our actions is because we want to offer them up to other humans as reasons to believe something. So what Brian is saying is that our notion of self necessarily involves ideas of other people and how they think about us. If you say you are a physics professor, you attach meaning to that by assuming that your audience knows what it means to be a physics professor, what a professor is, what physics is, and so forth, and all the...
So, that's my shopping trip, and now I am going home, back 80 kilometers. And it's getting a little dark, and I have this podcast to listen to. My reaction to the podcast that I just heard on the Sean Carroll Mindscape, the podcast, and had this guy who was talking about the self, how it is socially constructed according to him. And there's no authentic self. Doesn't persist over time as something real. I guess he's a human there. This doesn't have to be the true story. There are other perspectives on this. He doesn't believe in a soul, and he doesn't get down to the deep level of what consciousness is, because consciousness is something deeper than the social construction of the self. You can imagine that I'm constructed in various different ways. Let's say I grew up in China, I would be different, right? But I would have the same consciousness, I think. And that consciousness is mysterious. It's not something you can reduce to a social construction. It consists of something that we don't know what it is, and we don't know its boundaries in time and in terms of whether it can be replicated ever in the universe or another universe. We don't know. That's the idiotic conundrum. And he didn't get to that level in this podcast. Materialist, I guess he dismisses it. It dismisses that there is a mystery here. Because what I am saying and what Jeffrey Klampner is saying is that sure you can construct yourself in various ways, but that feeling you have of being yourself, that feeling is not part of the world. It's just not part of the world. So we don't know what it is. We don't know if it can be replicated, repeated, or if somebody else fundamentally has that same self in that deepest sense of what consciousness is. Now, if you consult some religions like Hinduism, they're going to tell you that it's all the same. It comes down to this one universal soul that puts on all these masks, and it's masks all the way down, according to this podcast we had. But according to Hinduism, it's just one consciousness is behind every mask. So it's not masks all the way down to them. It's more like there's the 1,000 masks of God, infinite masks of God, but it's just one God. It's not masks all the way down. So you think it's masks all the way down, then you have eliminated consciousness. You haven't explained it. And I think consciousness demands an explanation. It's something we should try. Or we can't help but, or some of us can't help trying to explain it. What is this feeling that I'm feeling? That feeling itself cannot be a social construction. The content of it can be a social construction. And doubtless much of the content in mine is. But there is still something there, the qualia, that you cannot eliminate. They are real because I feel it right now. And then the question is, what is feeling it? Something is feeling it. Because those qualia do exist. I'm not okay with eliminating those from my ontology, because that's no, they exist. And would somebody else walking down the road making an exactly the same video, because everything in their world is the same, including that physical body, would he have to necessarily have the same consciousness? That is the idiotic conundrum. And that is the essence of the self on a philosophical level, not on a psychological level. So that's fine if you're going to be a psychologist. Maybe you don't have to talk about the philosophy. Maybe you don't have to go that deep. But that's where I am now thinking about. Because I can't unsee the idiotic conundrum. It's a conundrum. And explained. The undiscovered country, huh? Don't know. Don't know. Oh. It's just one old man, Jeffrey Klempner, and myself in the world really seriously thinking about it. Or at least really seriously thinking about it and entertaining the notion that you can't just explain it away like the Hinduists do with this universal soul. There's something, some other possibilities too. You must at least be skeptical and open to different explanations, different ways it could be than this numerically singular person that is behind all our mosques. And that idea, if that is true, then that is solipsism anyway. And that is not a pleasant thought. I mean, it's both pleasant and unpleasant, right? The pleasant part is then it creates complete justice. Because every wrong you do, you get it back by being those other people that you do something wrong to, and vice versa. So everyone gets their turn being everyone else because there is only one person in existence. But that is a very lonely world because then there's also nobody to talk to. No love except self-love and illusions masks. And that is a depressing thought one. If you realize that and believe it, then I can understand wanting to zone out from that and just try to forget it again. And I guess these enlightened people, they always seem to want to forget it by not being part of it anymore. But another way to forget it is to exist as all these creatures that are unaware, unenlightened, right? So why you can go up or down and the consciousness hierarchy there, and I have the same effect. But then if you realize that it's just one person anyway, then there's no point, because then it just becomes a game, and the ultimate goal would then be harm reduction. So you just want to reduce the harm and drop out of it. which also is impossible because you are the remaining beings. That's the same as you. So that's not really a coherent idea, but I guess if you see it all as suffering, then you would aim in that direction. It's not all suffering, of course, but it's pointless if it's all fake. I mean, the persons are fake. Separation is fake. So anyway, I want there to be such a thing as different consciousnesses. So I hope the conundrum is resolved by there actually being more than one.